welcome on into this week's episode of Digging Deeper. I'm Matt Cordy, joined here today by a man that's not my Lord, might be my priest, and is a little bit like Melchizedek, I guess. I mean, he's pretty mysterious.
So true.
I guess I know who begat him, but I don't know. I don't think he's going to disappear like him, so at least hopefully not in the next 30 minutes or so.
I did bring you a gift of bread and wine, though.
Oh, thank you for the blessing.
Welcome.
Yes.
You're welcome, my child.
Yes.
I do expect a tithe from you.
Okay. But yeah, it was a great sermon that we had here this past Sunday, kicking off the new sermon series, Jesus Matters for Us and Our Salvation. And going into Advent, always interesting to see how we are able to bring that in, just being a unique time of anticipating our Lord and Savior. And I think Pastor Marcus did a good job of finding different ways to break that down in a unique way that we haven't done as often, I would say. So
yeah, I mean, it's funny. One of the things with like Advent and Lent and Christmas and Easter is like, it's like the same message every time. You know what I mean? And so it's like, how do we, and yet it is like a diamond. Like the reason why we celebrate these things every year and why they're so important every year is it's like, it's this different facets of the same diamond. But it is, putting together a series and thinking through like, how do we have a fresh appreciation? How do we have a fresh engagement with the reality of the incarnation, with the reality of Christ's return? How do we think about this in a new way that speaks to us where we're at right now in this moment? And by new way, I don't mean like different from what's been eternally true, but I just mean like a way that is fresh to us that we might hear it with new ears. And so, so I really appreciate the way that Pastor Marcus has put this series together, and I'm excited to preach through it, and was excited to be able to get the first one up and running. Yeah,
and learning about how Jesus is both our Lord and priest, I think was very insightful, and it's, like you said, something that we know. Yeah. But hearing it and hearing like a lot of the things that go into that, I think were very helpful, and nice to be looking and hearing the Psalms. I know we've been riding in the Old Testament for a month, but we're going to stay in there at least for this past week. And
water's great.
Yeah.
Splash around a little bit.
Yeah, so I think we're going to start digging in the water, I guess. Okay. I don't know.
Okay, good, great.
But anyways, as we're digging here, we're going to look into your sermon where you mentioned that calling Jesus like the Messiah or the Son of David could make him seem inferior as to looking back to the ancient Near East. And then here in your unused notes, you actually have like 6 different points about Jesus and sort of tying it into some New Testament references as well.
Yeah, so that's where, I mentioned in the sermon, Psalm 110, and in particular, Psalm 110 verse 1 is referenced a lot in the New Testament, either quoted directly or alluded to many times over, in particular by Jesus himself, where he says, like, this is about me. Like that's his point. I'm not just David's son, I'm David's Lord.
Right.
And the writers of the New Testament really pick up on this. And this is one of the, fun things about, I think, reading the New Testament is you'll encounter something that a New Testament writer will say about Jesus fulfilling some sort of messianic prophecy. And sometimes it's really clear. Like, for example, I've referenced this the last couple of weeks, but the Davidic king, 2 Samuel 7, that prophecy, there's so much where Jesus is just such the obvious fit for that it's like, dude, it's so crazy. But then there's sometimes where the New Testament writers are like, well, he did this. We kind of got to figure out how this makes sense of something in the Old Testament. And it's like they dig back and are like, this will do. And they bring it in, which seems fine to me. Actually, Jesus says all of the Old Testament points to him. And so that's what they're trying to do. But so in particular, though, you see this with Psalm 110, verse 1. Now, I went through a bunch of them in the sermon itself, and so I won't rehash all of that. But I had even more that I didn't end up using. One is like, there's different ways we can, like, so I talked about Acts 2 in Peter's sermon and about how Peter ties Psalm 110 verse 1 to Jesus' death, resurrection, ascension, and the coming of the Holy Spirit. But he also does it because he's talking to a predominantly Jewish audience to make clear to them that Jesus is greater than David. And then the book of Hebrews really references Psalm 110 a ton. So I talked about how it says he's greater than the angels, but that also that he's in a position to mediate for us is a major theme in Hebrews, and that he's exalted to God's right side, which may be like, yeah, you covered that. But actually the the importance to note here is God exalts him while humanity rejected him. And so the author of Hebrews really highlights that, or actually it's also in Acts 5 where Peter's like, Jesus, whom you killed, God has exalted to his right hand. And so he's showing the contrast between God's view of Jesus and what humanity did to Jesus when he was here. And then again, there's the Levitical, like as a priest, like while he is a priest in the order of Melchizedek, he also functions as a Levitical priest, offering sacrifices, of course, himself, but showing that his sacrifice is complete, which we covered ad nauseum in my sermon. And then that he also is conquered his enemies initially, and that we await his ultimate conquest really gets picked up in Hebrews 10 as well. So all that to say, I covered a lot of that in my sermon, but there's even like way more we could have done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a lot about, especially verse 1,
Yeah.
and how there's so many things that pull from that. But verse 2, actually, you didn't really mention in your sermon. You have a piece here that you sort of cut out if you want to dive into that.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I skipped verses 2 and 3 and verses 5 and 6 as well. I didn't.
Yeah.
So there's only 7 verses, and I only preached on 3 of them. So real quick, I'll say why that was, and then I'll get into what you missed or what I missed and not sharing anything about them with you. So one is really the structure of Psalm 110 seems to be essentially, we might say, 2 oracles and then explanations that follow the oracles. So it goes like Psalm 110 verse 1, oracle number 1, here's this king imbued with divine authority. Here's what he does, verses 2 and 3. Then you get oracle number 2. Here's this priest in the order of Melchizedek. Here's what he does, verses 5 and 6. And then 7 is this kind of wrap-up thing.
Yeah.
And so what I tried to do is just be like, there's so much in this text. Like I said, like it's all over the New Testament. Like I was talking with Marcus about this on Sunday, and I was like, dude, we could actually do an entire sermon series on just Psalm 110. Like it's just so rich.
Yeah.
And so I say all that to say, like, I just had to make sort of an editorial choice that way. So real quick thing. So first oracle, God has this king who sits by his side. It's the Messiah. And then sort of the commentary on that, what flows from that, verses 2 and 3 is this: the Lord sends forth from Zion your mighty scepter, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people will offer themselves freely on the day of your power in holy garments. From the womb of the morning, the dew of your youth will be yours. So this image we're supposed to get here is that God, like the Lord, so your Lord here is Yahweh, sends forth from Zion, from the holy city, your mighty scepter, rule in the midst of enemies. So it's like God is sending out his king and the king's army to go and rule in the midst of his enemies. And that the king's army, his people, are joining him, are walking with him freely in the day of his power. And they're wearing holy garments from their earliest days, from when they're in their womb into their youth and presumably into their adulthood. And so it's this image of a king going out, conquering, and his people joyfully and freely following him in that conquest from the earliest days of youth. So, I mean, there's really great messianic theme here that, like, we follow our King Jesus, and we don't do it with him, beating us from behind. We do it freely because he's freely given himself to us. Yeah. And that this, I think, verse 3, this people offering themselves freely, really gets at the sort of transformation that the gospel brings about. That as the Spirit works in my heart, it's like, I don't obey Jesus because I have to or because I'm scared. It's because I get to and I want to, and why wouldn't I want it? It's like that's sort of the image we get here is these people who just like love following this king. And then I think there's some interesting baptismal imagery here too as well, that they're wearing holy garments. And so often baptismal imagery in the New Testament is about taking off the old self and putting on the new self, right? Being clothed in Christ. And so I think I'm happy to read that into here. So
yeah, no, I love seeing that. But you also made a note here that at times this can even be misused and sort of contorted into.
I forgot about that. Yeah. I just went on a mini sermon there, but you're right. No. So that's the thing too. Yeah. So the militaristic language is, well, I mean, here's the thing. It sort of rubs, I think, modern people the wrong way sometimes. Yeah. And they're like, oh, I'm uncomfortable with that. The Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, whatever. And like, okay. But it is used like all over the Bible. Like it just is like and we're called the church militant.
Yeah.
And so there's a way in which it is appropriate to use militaristic language when we think about life as God's people, when we think about what it is to follow Jesus. And it's super important to remember this alongside of Ephesians 6, which says our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers of and forces of evil of this dark world, the spiritual forces of evil. So it is a spiritual battle, not a so my enemy. I'm to love my human enemy, right? My human enemy, I'm to love, I'm to pray for, I'm to care for, that sort of thing. My spiritual enemies, those things I'm supposed to battle. And we are part of that battle. That, yes, Jesus has the ultimate victory, but our job is to come in and fight against those forces of evil and speak truth to that which is destructive and fight against things that hurt and harm people in this world.
So you're telling me God's not going to make my human enemies into my footstool?
If only. I mean, so not yours, but there is, now this would be a little bit like risque, but one of the texts that connects to this would be Revelation 19, which is Jesus coming back as this conquering king. And then it's not like just spiritual. It is, I mean, and just, but it's like, man, if you human being are opposing the king, like it doesn't go well for you in the book of Revelation. And so there is actually a little bit of that element of like, well, yeah, maybe some humans, if they continue to oppose the king when he shows up, like that's a choice you're making. And it's not going to go well. So you don't get a footstool, but the king does. Yeah.
We'll take it.
Yep.
One of the highlights, I think, at least for me from your sermon, was where you talked about how Jesus is Lord and we are not. I mean, that quote right there was pretty evocative for me of just so many things and how we try to make things about ourselves and sort of put ourselves at the forefront. And in our culture today, that's pretty prevalent. And you have really, it's quotes from this author, Arthur Brooks, where he has this whole article that you sort of pulled things from, which I'm excited to dig into some of these, but he talks a lot about how people, and this is sort of me editorializing, that people have main character energy, or what I've even heard, main character syndrome, where people go throughout their lives thinking that everything sort of revolving around them. It's very egocentric, where things are coming back to them and everyone else is sort of a side character, or to use even more gaming terminology, an NPC. So very much so that everything relates back to them. And I just think it's interesting, some of these quotes that you have here from Arthur Brooks.
Yeah, so this is from an article that was published in The Atlantic. It was either just this past week or the week before. It's a very, very recent article. Arthur Brooks is a author I like quite a bit. He wrote a book on loving your enemies. He is a Christian, but really writes in a lot of mainstream publications, teaches at Harvard. So really sharp guy, prolific author, great writer, just very wise. So whenever he has an article come out, like I kind of am like, try to get my hands on it. So, but this article was quite timely, and I wanted to use it in the sermon so bad, but there was so much biblical work that we had to do. And if I faced that tension of like, do I do the sort of extra biblical work and take out some cultural work, I usually err biblical. That's probably not true, but I try to err biblical. And so I wasn't able to get this in at all. So the article, though, is he says, like, the key to happiness is, I think the title is something like, the key to happiness is to make yourself smaller. And so
to get happier, make yourself smaller.
Is that the title? Okay. Yeah. And so, he gets at this and he says, like, there's a certain way in which I think we all in the contemporary West live with a certain level of main character syndrome. Like there's just no way we don't have that. Like, I mean, even like our advertising is now catered to us, right? Like that's the whole message we've heard our entire lives, right? So we're just sort of inescapable. And so Brooks says, what ends up happening with that, and maybe even apart from that, is we end up thinking like, hey, everyone's thinking about me all the time, and because I said this, they're going to be worried about this. When the reality is, if we all sit and like think about it for a second, most people aren't thinking about you most of the time. Yeah. Like they just aren't. Like your mom maybe, and really maybe not even her that much. Like they just aren't. And your great grandkids aren't going to remember your name. Like they're, no offense, it's just true. And so there's a way in which we build up these voices and we build up how much other people are thinking about us when really it's not that much. And so that alone, living with that level of thinking people are thinking about me that much, creates unhappiness in us, right? Because we're thinking positive things, negative things about us, that sort of thing. But then what else that does is it puts a sort of narrative inside of us that says like, all right, well, since kind of everyone's thinking about me all the time, again, we don't actually say this, but we just sort of functionally live this way.
Right.
Then I just need to become bigger. I need to become better. I need to become more important. And if I do that, then I'll be happy. So he writes this, we tend to believe that to be happier, we need to become bigger in our own minds and in the minds of others. But that's wrong. What we really need to achieve, both the perspective on life we need and the peace we crave, is to get smaller in relation to everything and everyone else. When we experience our own littleness, we stop blocking our ability to see our life in just proportion. We can relax into a humble reality of not being the object of attention and criticism. And we can appreciate a magnificent universe without spoiling it with our self-absorption and petty concerns. Whew. Well, and I think there's just a lot to that, and I think it's like a humbling and helpful reality. I mean, one of the things I was talking with someone about this, I can't remember who it was, but I think if I just look at myself, well, let me put it this way. You ready?
I'm ready.
Why do so many leaders or successful people or celebrities or ministry leaders or politicians, whatever, why so often does it seem they find themselves in like serious trouble, serious moral failures? And it seems to me a lot of times it's because they start to believe their own hype.
Yeah.
And so they live in a place where they believe they're as big as people are telling them that they are, when they're really not, right? And so it's funny to me that this happens in churches, right? But it does. And that's where, like, even in small churches, like, why? And that's where I think, like, even myself, like, I have a weird job, right? No one else gets a job where every week they stand in front of 300 people and talk for 30 minutes and everyone kind of listens, at least kind of listens, right?
Yeah.
That's weird. Other people don't do that. And so what can happen is, if that's a comfortable place for me, which is also weird that that's a comfortable place for me. And so then what can happen is I can start to be like, what the hell? I talk, we have this many downloads and 24 people are going to listen to this podcast, and who's listening to your podcast? Like, even though it's a really small scale, to be honest, but like, I'll start to believe my own hype, right? And then you start living into that own hype, and you abuse power, and you abuse people, and you abuse sexuality, whatever. And it's like, oh, that's insane. And so actually, Brooks is highlighting, like, dude, the trick is, like, you got to find places. You got to make yourself small. You got to go to those places. And so that's where even in my own life, like, I'm not at risk of doing anything exciting, trust me. But like, I've been like, dude, I got to go to some place where, like, no one knows me, where they don't care that I'm a pastor, where maybe it works against me that I'm a pastor. Yeah. And I just got to be uncomfortable and be the weirdo because I'm just too comfortable. Right. Like, so it's one of those things like that I'm like working on to sanctify myself that way. So anyway, I don't know. I'm talking a lot. Thoughts, Matt?
No, I think that's fascinating. I think that while this is, I don't think it's something that's necessarily new to our culture. I mean, there's countless tales that we know of people that throughout history that probably had this same thing where they did think it was all about them. Yeah. And maybe there's a certain truth to that because we still know them hundreds of years later.
Sure.
But at the same time, the cost of that came along with that, and they did have some sort of downfall there as well. But he also talks about here, Brooks, that sort of the fact of social media coming into this as well. And I think that I'll read this excerpt and then talk a little bit about it. But he says, the world is constantly inviting you to try to make yourself appear bigger in the eyes, in others' eyes and in your own. The fact underpins the entire social media business model. The trick to finding happiness is to get smaller, which we've talked about. But I do think that social media in general has probably amplified this. Yeah. And I do think that us, whether it's LinkedIn trying to get our profile all perfect and become more hireable, or whether it's any social media platform, you're sort of curating this sort of perfect image that you're putting out there and trying to put yourself out in front of others in a new way that wasn't available a couple decades ago. Yeah. And I do think, like he says, that it does It's how social media thrives.
That's how it works, dude.
Yeah. And
yeah.
without that, social media probably wouldn't be a thing.
Right.
But I do think that there's a way that social media certainly isn't helping this. Yeah.
I mean, even think about this. Like, what do we call social media? We call it social media platforms. Mm-hmm. And it's about building your platform. And what is a platform? It is an elevation of the self. Like that's what a platform is.
Yeah.
And that's what we say these things are. You know, like we're actually kind of explicit about it. And the idea that, well, if I had enough views or enough people followed me or liked me, then I'll feel really great. And I mean, and here's the thing too with this is I think, and actually why I think social media is a helpful way to think about it is I think sometimes when we think of stuff like this, when I'm talking about like, hey, make yourself smaller, don't make yourself bigger, I think a lot of times we can dismiss that and be like, well, yeah, the big arrogant celebrity or politician or that person over there who does that. Mm-hmm. Not me. I'm just a mild-mannered paper salesman, right? Like it's like, no, actually it functions the same way in your life. And we actually see this on social media. Like it's like, I don't really care about your food. Why are you telling me about it? Like, I mean, that's like a harsh way. If you want to share your food, share your food. But like my point being like, we all have this in us, man. Like we all have this drive in us to like elevate ourselves, to make ourselves big,
and be self-important,
and be self. And it cuts both ways. So I mean, C.S. Lewis highlights this a lot in terms of like false humility is just as prideful as straight up pride. So the sort of like because why? Because the focus is still on the self. If it's like, well, I'm just lowly pond scum. I'm no thing. I can't do anything. You are still relentlessly focused on the self. And it's actually still a very big self. But it's just a big self with a low view of self, or it's a big self with a high view of self, but it's still a big self. And the invitation is actually to have a smaller self.
Yeah, I like that picture. And Arthur Brooks also talks about that there's a cost that comes with this. He says, thinking about yourself all the time makes you miserable over the long term. Researchers have shown that such self-focus can provoke emotional problems, making social situations or task performance feel frightening and unpleasant.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, and I think this is the thing. Like, this is one of those things too. Like, let's think about anxiety. And I'm not like, listen, I've dealt with it at a clinical level. I'm not picking on anyone. All right. And what anxiety does is it forces you to ruminate. Like that's right. So you just ruminate on stuff again and again and again. And the reason why we do it is we think it's productive. We think like the more I think about this, the more I obsess about this, I'm actually doing something. Yeah. And you're actually not doing something. Like it's super counterproductive. And I think it's the same way in terms of like, if I'm constantly thinking about myself and my needs and my wants and what I want, it feels like, oh, I'm doing this because if I can finally feel this sense of contentment or this sense of completeness or acceptance, well, then I can actually do some good things and blah, 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 blah. But it's like, I'm actually just thinking and thinking. It's like, actually, if you just do this stuff, that's actually what liberates you. That's actually where you find happiness and joy. And so... And so if you constantly are pursuing a big sense of self, it actually leads one to be your life to be qualitatively worse. And that's like empirical research. Like this is like we have the facts on this. We know this. And so if I can like jump into something here, man. So what Brooks in the article, he proposes a solution. He's like, this is how you gain a small sense of self. And I have some caveats that I want to do at the end of this, if I may be so bold. Yeah. Okay, but he says, here's the 3-step solution. Very interesting. In The Atlantic, this last week, this is what he writes. First one is pursue awe and wonder, right? So that's the first step. He says, like, man, like, go out to nature or experience beauty at a high level or, in some sense, find awe, seek awe out, seek things that overwhelm you and point to actually the smallness of who you are. I mean, this is, he starts the article with one of the more popular classes at Harvard is on, I always mess it up, astronomy. Is that the science? Astronomy is the science. Astrology is the horoscopes, right?
I believe so.
Okay. Let us know if we're wrong. Astronomy, where like, and this, he talks to this student who takes this class, this gal, and she's like, I love it because when I look at the vastness of the universe, I see myself as a speck on top of a speck. And she's like, I find it comforting. which like sounds counterintuitive, but I actually also get it. Like, it's like, dude, not everything depends on whether or not my car ran well this morning. You know, there's just bigger things in the world. And
Did it?
It did actually really well. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. You know, and so all that say, first step, he says, is experience awe, experience wonder, go somewhere where you're encountering some bigger stuff. Second thing, in the Atlantic, he says, seek the divine. He's like, you should find God. But I'm like, well, pretty cool. He has that in there. And he's right. And now he, of course, sort of makes it sort of more broad and, you know, whatever. But like, although to be honest, if you want to be in line with the truth, and I think really where the most joy is to be found, yes, seek the true God. Any God is going to be better than just like yourself, to be honest. So, but really the true God's where it's at. IMO. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Big fan.
3 in 1.
3 in 1, you know? But he says, seek the divine. So that's great. And then the third thing he says is serve others without anyone knowing about it. Right? So do humble service and do it in places, spaces, ways that like no one else knows but you, which like Jesus talks about this. And I think that's right too. And he's like, do those 3 things and it helps you regain a smaller sense of self, a healthier sense of self. My sort of caveat I want to put on this is I think what Brooks talks about, and he's right, it's easier to do that from a place of power than from a place of non-power. I think it's a call for everybody, but like, I'll put it this way, you know, again, it's on a very small scale, but I'm the senior pastor of a church, right? And so for me to serve others quietly, to be humble, to pursue a small sense of self is actually a lot easier than someone who's like starting out in their career and they're really trying to make it. And so they got to be hungry and they got to make stuff happen and they got to kind of force themselves in. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I think there's like a tension here of like, not because even this person who's still starting off, Brooks is still right. You still should operate from a small sense of self. But I just want to acknowledge that like it's hard. Or, I mean, let's take it to a broader, like people who socially have been marginalized in the world and historically been pushed to the sides, to then be told you need a smaller sense of self feels sort of like, who are you to tell me that?
Right.
But again, I think it's actually true for all of us that regardless, I can still say like, okay, you know what, man, from where I am, it doesn't mean I can't have confidence. It doesn't mean I can't, it's the whole C.S. Lewis line. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. So regardless of what my station in life is, I can still pursue awe. I can still seek God, and I can still seek to serve others, even if I've historically been pushed to the side. Yeah. The actual way to real strength and real happiness and joy is in serving others and in honoring God. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, this is something that I struggle with in sort of my day-to-day too, because one of my jobs is to use the platforms of social media and modern communications to put out there ways where people are serving and that the way that us as the church are helping others. So it's sort of a weird quandary I find myself in at times.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because the thing is, I mentioned, Jesus quietly serving others. True. Jesus also says, let your light so shine before men that they may see what? Your good deeds and glorify your Father who is in heaven. And so Jesus also explicitly says, hey, show the world what you're doing. Like, let them know why, not for your glory, but so that they can glorify your Father who is in heaven. And so I think there's a way, like, to me, that's how I make sense of like why we have you in this position and why, because I've had people be like, I feel like we talk about what we do. And I'm like, one, I don't think we do it too much. I think the church that is constantly bragging on itself is not great. We're just trying to say like, here's what God's doing right now through us. We're excited, right? But my response is always like, Jesus tells us to show the world our good deeds. Like literally what he says. And in the very same sermon, Sermon on the Mount, he says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing.
Yeah.
Right. So he says both these things. And so Bonhoeffer, it's interesting in his book, Discipleship, says like, what are we to do with these? Like, it seems paradoxical, and it is paradoxical, but he says, yeah, you are to keep your service hidden. Keep your service hidden. Keep it hidden from who? Don't let your left hand know what your right hand. Keep it hidden from yourself.
Yeah.
Let other people see it. You keep it hidden from you. You don't see it. That's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. Bonhoeffer, pretty sharp.
Yeah.
Pretty sharp.
What a guy. We talked about him last week even.
Probably.
But yeah. No,
you can say it every week, Matt.
Yeah, that's fair. But no, I do think that's pretty enlightening. And I don't know. I think that even for myself, I feel like I'm learning more and more. And it's great to hear.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So as we're moving forward here, we go into a section where we talk about Melchizedek, and you talk a good amount about him in the sermon on sort of who he was, the mystery around him, the significance of his priestly order and everything. You also have a couple verses here in your unused notes, calling back to Hebrews 7, where Jesus is compared to Melchizedek. So if you just want to tell us a little bit more there.
Yeah, I mean, so I ended up having to cut part of Hebrews 7's argument for Jesus being a priest in the order of Melchizedek, because there's I already read a large chunk of Hebrews 7, but there's a lot more to the argument. And it's really, honestly, it's a really tight argument. So if you like philosophic or theological argumentation, the author of Hebrews does a phenomenal job, because he's like, listen, if the work the Levitical priesthood was doing, so that's what he talks about in Hebrews 7, that the verses I skipped, verse 11, he basically says, if the work the Levitical priesthood had been doing was sufficient, we wouldn't have needed a Messiah to be a priest. We wouldn't have needed that. We wouldn't have needed that. And he's like, but clearly it was lacking. Clearly it wasn't enough. And so there had to be another priest, a different kind of priest. And he couldn't, and I made this succinctly on Sunday, but he couldn't be a priest in the Levitical order. He had to be a priest in a different order. Mm-hmm. And really in the Old Testament, the only other one you got is Melchizedek. And so that is where the author of Hebrews is just saying, because the Levitical priesthood, though it was good and necessary for a time, was insufficient to get done what needed to get done for the atonement of sin, God raised up another priest in the order of Melchizedek in the person of Jesus Christ. So, yeah.
God's got a plan, and I always love seeing the many different ways that he's able to fulfill the promise of the Messiah.
Isn't that cool? I mean, I love that. It's so wild to me that this seemingly throwaway 3 verses in Genesis 14 that David picks up on it 1,000 years later, and then Jesus embodies it in his ministry and frankly references it in his ministry. And then the author of Hebrews is double tapping on that. It's awesome.
And I do think it's interesting just taking it outside of the Bible, where in a lot of different fiction you have sort of that chosen one arc, which you even mapped on to Jesus in a prior sermon during the summer, even maybe.
Yeah, Hero with 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell. I talked about that either in a sermon or even in here, maybe.
I think some of both.
Maybe a little bit of both.
I do think that in fiction we see that trope in a lot of different ways, where it's sort of some sort of prophecy and then fulfilled within that chosen one. And we see it in countless different examples, but that's one person writing this thing of fiction, and even then sometimes there's different ways where it's did he really fulfill this prophecy? But here we have the Bible, and we have all these different authors coming into one book, and still it maps out really well where Jesus is fulfilling all these different things that was hundreds and hundreds of years prior to him, and I think that's pretty amazing.
Totally. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
And sort of staying in that fiction world, you have some comparisons here between Melchizedek and Tom Bombadil. Which, for those of you wondering who Tom Bombadil is, thankfully, I know at least a little bit, and I'll try to give a little bit of background, but I'm curious to hear your backstory. But he's a person from the Lord of the Rings series that was created, and he was in a weird way sort of like a, not quite a wizard, but someone that came before, and someone that wasn't actually in the movies. So if you're I have no idea, I've watched the Peter Jackson films, don't know who he is. He's in the books. He also was actually just in the Rings of Power series in the second season.
Is he really? I haven't watched any of it. Okay.
Yeah. So he was in the second portion of that. That's where my main familiarity was with him prior to reading it in the 5th grade. But definitely a unique character where there's a lot of mystery around him, similar to Melchizedek, and certainly has a lot of powers, and Gandalf even goes back to him for wisdom and advice and things like that.
Yep.
So I do think it's interesting that you drew those comparisons, and I'm sure J.R.R. Tolkien had some of that in there as well. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, you've tapped into a lot of it. So yeah, I mean, Bombadil's just this like he's this sort of weird character, like and. If you read the Fellowship of the Ring, and I think it's Merry and Pippin find themselves, or maybe it's all four of the Hobbits. Actually, it is all four. They find themselves stuck and like they're in a rough spot, and he's this sort of dude who shows up and is like, "Well, hello," and he like kind of rescues them, and they hang out with him for a minute, and then he just sort of disappears. So he's this guy similar to our boy Melchizedek with sort of no ancestry. We're not really even sure what sort of creature he is. He's like anthropomorphic, like some sort of humanish type thing, but seems to have some sort of powers, and he just sort of arrives and disappears, and you're just not really sure what he's about. But he arrives and he rescues and he cares, and he's like, but he's sort of cryptic and weird. And so, at any rate, in like Tolkien scholars and whatever, I mean, the whole thing with Lord of the Rings is like, I mean, I don't know it that well, but what I do know is like, Tolkien obviously has messianic figures within it, but he doesn't do Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia. Aslan is Jesus. It's just like, that's the one. We all get it, right? Like and Tolkien is not that way. He's like, well, Aragorn sort of is, and Frodo sort of is, and Gandalf sort of is. Incidentally, there's kind of a prophet, priest, king there. Yeah. Like Frodo's the priest, Aragorn's the king, Gandalf is the prophet. Yeah. So it's like the threefold office of Christ. Okay. All right. So you have that. And there's even other messianic figures you might actually want to read into Tolkien stuff as well. Bombadil being one of those, and that's where Tolkien scholars would say like, yeah, I think like Melchizedek, like he's sort of the Melchizedekian guy because he comes early on in the books, like he's an early figure.
It's pretty early.
Yeah, and yet you see messianic influences within him, and he's sort of he's somewhat divine. Like he operates just in a different way than anyone else.
Yeah, and in that way, I even saw some comparisons when doing a little ancillary research here, that they were saying he's sort of the antithesis, the better antithesis of Sauron.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, like you could say any of those messianic examples that you said like could be examples, but he's more of a fulfilled one where he has sort of more of those ways where he contradicts like the actual like mission of Sauron there.
Well, and I think that is where we might even it's similar. I talked about it's possible that Melchizedek is what we would call a theophany or a Christophany. Right. So an appearance of the pre-incarnate Christ, which is is really the second person of the Trinity. It's a non-incarnate Christ. So that is a more antithesis to a spiritual evil. That is more a spiritual presence, whereas Jesus is, obviously physical and spiritual, right? He's both as the God man, whereas he's really just in a divine form in this instance, and Bombadil functions somewhat similarly. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and even when I was doing more research on him, I even drew comparisons to other characters and other series that I thought of. Like I got big into the Wheel of Time series.
Yeah, me too.
Which Robert Jordan's series that's super expansive, but there's a similar character similarly named Tom Marilyn.
Yes.
So honestly, I thought some comparisons there. I haven't even finished the book series, but I do know that, I mean, it's very long.
It's very long. What book are you on?
The third.
Oh, I'm on 9.
Yeah.
So, okay.
But regardless, I think he's a character that sort of pops up, helps the characters, then disappears in like sort of a heroic way. So I do think sort of interesting.
There's that too.
Well,
yeah, that seems to come up in fantasy. Yeah, it's good.
Well, excuse us for nerding out for a quick second there, and we apologize for anything that we did get wrong. But that is it for this episode or this segment of Digging Deeper. Coming up ahead, we're going to have Amy and Nate talking about There Is a King, and that'll be a good dive into, a lot about how we talk about Jesus as King. So a lot to talk about there for them. And coming up next week, we finally have an episode without Pastor Gabe. I know it's been a couple weeks, but Pastor Marcus will be back in here in the green seat, and he'll be talking about Proverbs 8, verses 12 through 31, and eternal wisdom. He has a lot of wisdom to give to us, yes?
Yeah, well, I just want to say I'm jealous. Understanding Proverbs 8 as like really pointing to who Christ is and what he's about is like, it's one of the coolest passages ever that I think is under talked about. So get excited. Marcus will have a ton of great info on it. I'm sure of
Yeah.
it. And I wish I could do it. I'm a bit jealous. So, but I'll be listening, fly on the wall. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if that doesn't get you to want to go ahead and read Proverbs 8, I don't know what will. So that's it for this segment. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to stay around for Amy and Nate.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
We're back again to talk about the music from this past weekend. And just, again, I feel like God was at work. And same kind of situation where we picked music. And then not until the sermon happened and we were singing this song was just the realization for me of how much it fit. So Nate was going to read Psalm 110.
Yeah, so reading on Sunday. Goes, the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion. You will rule in the midst of your enemies. Your troops will be willing on the day of battle. Arrayed in holy majesty, from the womb of the dawn, you will receive the dew of your youth. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. The Lord is at your right hand. He will crush kings on the day of his wrath. He will judge the nations, heaping up the dead and crushing the rulers of the whole earth. He will drink from the brook beside the way. Therefore, he will lift up his head.
Yeah, and I just loved how Pastor Gabe tied it in, took that whole psalm and kind of summarized it, and then like singing the song, There is a King, how it all connected, all of those things about how Jesus is God, he is divine, he is with us. He rules and reigns over everything always. He intercedes for us. Like all of those pieces and parts are actually in There is a King. And it kind of brought tears to my eyes, which we've been on the struggle bus a little bit today with. But just
Or the blessed bus.
yeah, just how much it just really tied in. I thought it was so good.
Yeah. And the idea of, at the end of the day, the highest authority, the highest power, because we have rulers, we have laws that we have to live by and follow, but knowing that and really believing that Jesus is the one we have to answer to in every moment and in every action. It sounds scary at first, but then it also frees you from the authority of being ruled by other things. And if you answer to Jesus, no one, what is the verse? Something about if you live by God's law, you're blameless in the kind of before everything else. So
yeah, I loved when he pointed out Melchizedek actually means righteous.
Yeah, righteous king.
Righteous king. I
King
thought,
of
how cool
righteousness.
is that? I just thought that was so cool.
Righteous.
So, yeah. So we're gonna sing "There Is a King" for you, and just listen to the words because it's just so beautiful. There is a King seated among us. Let every heart receive him now. Where there is praise, he will inhabit. There will be grace and mercy all around. And every burden
thanks Amy and Nate for going through There Is a King. So many ways that could tie in, and I love hearing about those moments where it might not even been necessarily planned, but everything just sort of syncs up so well. I loved hearing you talk about even a little bit about Melchizedek and everything there. Truly a great Sunday sermon, worship, all of that. Loved hearing it all flow together. So as I already mentioned, coming up next week, it'll be Pastor Marcus talking about eternal wisdom. And as Pastor Gabe already previewed, go to Proverbs 8, chapter 8, verses 12 through 31 for